The sun rose gently over the wide Arizona desert, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. The dry wind carried the smell of dust and grass across Eli Turner's ranch. Every morning began the same way for him, quiet, slow, and lonely. He would wake before dawn, feed the horses, and check the fences. The sound of boots on sand and the creak of wooden gates were the only things that reminded him he wasn't dreaming. Eli was a man of few words. Years of working alone had made him silent and thoughtful. His wife, Clara, had passed away many years ago, leaving him only the ranch and the wide emptiness around it. He didn't have children, no close friends, and rarely went into town except to buy supplies. The desert, with its open skies and endless quiet, was both his comfort and his prison. That morning felt no different from the others. Eli saddled his old horse, Dusty, and rode toward the palm grove at the far end of his property. The palms were old and tall, their dry fronds whispering softly in the breeze. He liked that sound. It was almost like voices talking gently in the distance. He never imagined that by the end of the day, those palms would bring a stranger to his door and change everything he thought he knew about his land. It was late afternoon when Eli noticed the small dust cloud on the road. A car was coming, an unusual sight out there. Few people visited his ranch unless they were lost or selling something. He stood by the fence watching as an old faded blue car struggled up the hill, coughing smoke. Finally, it came to a stop right near his gate, engine hissing and steaming. A woman stepped out slowly. She was around 60, maybe older, dressed in simple clothes and a wide hat to block the sun. Her face was thin, her hands trembling slightly as she held a small brown bag. She looked out of place and like someone from another time who had wandered too far. "Afternoon, ma'am," Eli said, tipping his hat. "Looks like your car's had enough of the desert." The woman gave a tired smile. "Seems that way. I didn't think it would make it this far." "Come on in," Eli offered. "I've got water and maybe we can cool that engine down a bit." She hesitated for a moment but then nodded. There was something in her eyes and a mix of worry and longing. She followed him through the gate toward the small wooden house surrounded by dust and cactus. Eli poured her a glass of water, and she drank slowly, as if every sip brought back a memory. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're kind." "It's been a long drive." "No trouble at all," Eli said. "You're far from anywhere out here. What brings you to this land?" The woman looked out the window toward the palm grove in the distance. Her voice shook when she answered, "This place, it used to belong to the Dawsons, didn't it?" Eli nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My grandfather bought it after the Dawson place burned down. That was long before I was born." She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with emotion. "I thought so. I've been looking for it for a long time." She turned toward him and said words that made Eli's heart skip a beat. "This is where I want to be buried." Eli stared at her, unsure if he'd heard right. "Buried?" he repeated, half laughing. "You mean here?" She nodded slowly, her face calm but serious. "Right here, near those palms. That's where I belong." He didn't know what to say. He thought maybe she was joking or not in her right mind, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't crazy or confused. They were full of old pain and memory. Eli tried to lighten the moment. "Well, that's not something I hear every day. There must be a story behind that," she smiled faintly. "Yes, a long one." He poured her another cup of coffee and they sat on the porch as the sun began to set. The desert glowed gold and pink and the sound of crickets filled the air. For a while neither spoke. Then quietly she began to tell him her story. "My name's Margaret," she said. "I grew up not far from here. My father worked for the Dawson family. They owned all this land once, and the ranch, the cattle, everything. We lived in a small house near the grove. I was just a little girl then, maybe 6 or 7. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "It was a beautiful place. I used to play under those palms every afternoon. There was a boy, Thomas Dawson. He was only a few years older than me. We were like brother and sister. He'd carve shapes in the wood, build tiny houses with sticks, and tell me stories about the stars. I thought he was the bravest person in the world." Eli listened quietly, drawn into her words. The way she spoke made it easy to imagine the laughter of children in the desert wind, the way the palms must have looked long ago when the ranch was alive with people. "One night," she continued softly, "everything changed. There was a storm, a terrible one. The wind howled and lightning struck one of the barns. It caught fire fast. Everyone was shouting, running, trying to save the horses. My father carried me out, but Thomas—" Her voice broke. She pressed a hand against her heart. "He never made it." "No one ever found his body. The Dawsons left after that. My family moved away too, but I never forgot this place." Eli looked toward the palms again. They stood still and tall, silent witnesses of a story buried by time. "And now you've come back," he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "I've come back because I always felt he was still here, under those trees. I don't know why, but I can feel it. When I close my eyes, I see him standing there, smiling." Something in her voice touched Eli deeply. He had known loss himself. Maybe that's why he couldn't bring himself to send her away. "Tomorrow morning," he said gently, "I'll take you there. You can show me the spot you remember." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the woman's words, about the boy lost in the fire, and about the palm grove that had always felt strangely peaceful. The desert outside was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He wondered what they might find out there, and why his hands had trembled when she looked at the trees. Morning came cool and silent. Eli packed a shovel just in case, and they walked together toward the grove. The air was still and the sunlight flickered between the tall palms. The ground was covered with fallen fronds and dry sand. Margaret stopped at a certain spot, breathing hard. "Here," she whispered. "Right here. I used to sit here with him. This is where I saw him last." Eli didn't know what he expected, but he began to move the palm fronds aside one by one. The ground beneath was uneven and packed hard with years of dust. He brushed away the dirt with his hands, working slowly, carefully. Then something caught his eye. A small piece of wood darkened by age sticking out from the sand. He froze for a moment, heart beating fast. He knelt down and cleared the dirt around it. It was part of an old plank, rough and splintered, with faint letters carved into it. His hands began to tremble as the carving became clearer. 2 letters stood out, barely readable but unmistakable. T.D. Margaret fell to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She reached out and touched the plank as if it were made of gold. "Thomas Dawson," she whispered. "I told you. He's here." Eli looked at her, then at the old marker, then back at the silent palms swaying gently above them. The desert wind blew softly across the grove, carrying with it the scent of old wood and dust. And something else too, something almost sacred. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The truth had been buried for decades, waiting for this moment. Waiting for her return, Eli stood quietly, feeling something heavy lift from the air, as if the land itself had exhaled after years of holding a secret. Margaret's shoulders shook as she whispered again, this time to the ground itself. "I found you, Tommy. I came back. Just like I promised." The wind answered softly through the palms, and Eli, standing beside her, felt a shiver run through his chest. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel alone. Eli stood silently beside Margaret as the wind moved through the palms. The wooden plank lay half-buried, marked with the faded letters T.D. It felt like time itself had stopped there. The air carried an old sadness, but also something peaceful, as if the land was relieved to finally be remembered. Margaret's tears fell quietly on the dry sand, and Eli didn't speak. Some moments were too sacred for words. When they finally walked back to the house, the sky was glowing with late morning light. Margaret looked tired, her steps slower than before, but her face carried a calm Eli hadn't seen earlier. She smiled faintly as she whispered, "I knew he was here. I just knew it." Eli nodded. "I believe you," he said softly. He didn't know how to explain it, but he felt it too. That strange peace in the air, like something long forgotten had finally been found. That evening, Eli made soup and invited Margaret to eat on the porch. The desert stretched out endlessly before them, golden in the fading light. She ate slowly, her eyes drifting between the horizon and the palm grove. "You said your grandfather owned this land after the Dawsons left," she said after a while. "Did he ever talk about them?" Eli thought for a moment. "Not much," he replied. "Just small things. He said when he bought the place, the old ranch was burned and empty. There was a little grave near the palms, marked with a board. He never knew who buried the boy there, but he said he felt it was right to leave it as it was." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. "Then your grandfather was the one who gave him a resting place." Eli stared down at his hands. He felt something heavy in his chest. Not guilt, but the weight of history that had quietly passed through his family without them knowing its meaning. "Maybe that's why the grove always felt different," he said. "Peaceful. Like someone was watching over it." Margaret smiled softly. Someone was. Over the next few days, she stayed at the ranch. Her car was too damaged to drive, and Eli didn't mind her company. It had been years since anyone shared stories with him at dinner. Margaret told him about her life after leaving the desert, the small town she grew up in, the factory she worked at, the people who came and went. There was sadness in her stories, but also quiet strength. She spoke often about her brother, Thomas. "He was brave," she said once, staring at the night sky. "When that storm came, he pushed me out of the barn before it collapsed. I remember his hand, that was the last thing I saw. I've carried that memory all my life. I just needed to see the place one last time." Eli listened quietly. He never interrupted, never tried to change the subject. Something about her words made him think of his own losses, his wife, Clara, who had also left quietly one cold winter night. Maybe that's why he understood Margaret so well. She wasn't chasing ghosts. She was searching for peace. Each morning, she'd walk slowly to the palms carrying a small bunch of desert flowers she picked along the path. She'd lay them near the wooden plank and sit there for hours, sometimes humming softly, sometimes silent. Eli would watch from a distance, giving her space, yet feeling connected to the moment, as if he, too, was part of that quiet healing. One evening, while Eli was fixing a fence, Margaret came to him with a tired smile. "Eli," she said gently, "I need to ask you something important." He wiped his hands and looked at her. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "When my time comes, when I'm gone, I want you to bury me there, beside Thomas, so he's not alone anymore." Eli's hands froze. He stared at her, his heart heavy. "Don't talk like that," he said softly. "You've still got time," she smiled faintly. "Maybe, but time doesn't run the same for everyone. I came here to find peace, and I've found it. I don't want to leave again." He didn't know how to answer. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm certainty. It was the kind of peace that comes when a person has finally closed every open door from the past. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you'll do that." Eli looked toward the palm swaying in the orange sunset. Then he nodded slowly. "I promise." Days turned into weeks. Margaret grew weaker, but she never complained. Eli helped her around the house, brought her tea, and sometimes read aloud from an old book she had carried in her bag. The evenings grew cooler, the desert winds softer. Life seemed to slow down to the rhythm of her breathing. One morning, Eli woke up early as usual. The sun was barely rising. He made coffee and went to check on her. Her room was quiet, the window open to let in the cool breeze. She was lying peacefully on the bed, her hands folded over her chest. Her face was calm, almost smiling, like someone who had finally reached home. Eli stood there for a long time, his eyes wet. He whispered, "You kept your promise, Margaret. You came back." That afternoon he prepared a simple wooden box, the best he could make from the old boards in his shed. He worked slowly, carefully, his hands steady though his heart trembled. He lined it with a soft white sheet and placed a small bunch of desert flowers beside her. When the sun began to set, he carried her gently toward the grove. The air was still and warm, the sky painted in shades of red and gold. He dug a place beside the old wooden plank marked TD, just as she had wished. The desert seemed to hold its breath as he lowered her down, the palms whispering softly above. Eli carved a new board, smooth and strong, and placed it beside the old one. On it he wrote with careful hands, "Margaret Dawson, finally home." When he was done, he sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind through the palms. It was the same sound he had heard every day for years, yet now it felt different, gentler, almost alive. The grove no longer felt lonely. It felt like a place of peace. He thought about her last words, about how she believed the land remembered. And maybe it did. Maybe the earth keeps every story, every tear, every promise buried within it until someone comes to listen. That night, Eli sat on the porch, looking at the stars. He felt something change inside him, not sadness, but gratitude. Margaret's visit had opened something in him that had been closed for years. She had reminded him that every place holds a story, and every soul deserves a home. Weeks passed, and the desert began to bloom after a rare rain. Small wildflowers appeared around the grove, painting the sand with color. Eli took it as a sign, a quiet thank you from the earth itself. He kept visiting the palms, sometimes speaking softly to the graves, telling them about the day's work or the weather. It became part of his life, and in that peaceful place he no longer felt like a man living alone. One morning he placed a fresh bunch of flowers between the two markers and stood quietly for a while. "You're together now," he said softly, "and the land remembers you both." The wind blew gently, carrying his words through the desert, across the quiet hills, and back again, as if the land was whispering back, "Thank you." Eli smiled, touched his hat, and walked slowly back to the house. The palms swayed behind him, the sunlight falling softly through their leaves. The ranch was the same, yet somehow it felt new, lighter, warmer, and alive with memory. And from that day on, whenever the wind passed through the palms, it carried two voices instead of one, a boy and his sister finally home together, resting in peace under the watchful eyes of the desert that never forgets.